everybody. My name's Alan. On behalf of the crew, I'd like to welcome you to another edition of Bridging Heaven and Earth. This has been a really wonderful week for us at Bridging Heaven and Earth. One is we had a truly extraordinary person come across the country. As most of you know, we do the show in California. And somebody came from the East Coast, I think Maine or Delaware, Stephen Royal Jackson, who's a transformative healer and is the author of a wonderful new book, 8 Steps to Love, which basically is a practical guide to transform stress and conflict into the peaceful power and experience of love. And we had a chance to spend some time with Stephen over the last few days, and he's really a gifted healer, and this book can really be a helpful tool and a transformative tool for many of us here. So we're honored that he took the time and energy to come visit us here in California and to be on Bridging Heaven and Earth. And also we've gotten over the years, as most of you know, we had Omashar as a real favorite of us here at Bridging Heaven and Earth. And a lot of people called and suggested that, you know, we try to get Omashar back on, and we did. And we couldn't find the dates. He travels all over the world, and he hasn't been in the United States in about a year and a half. So we just thought that we'd show some of the old clips of Omashar songs. We have one, Trust to Love, and We Feel Love. And if you've seen the shows with Omashar, I mean, that's basically what he's about. And also an exciting thing that happened to us here at Bridging Heaven and Earth is that, I think I mentioned it on a few of the shows as they went along, that we had applied to be a 501c3 nonprofit corporation, which would allow us, the Bridging Heaven and Earth Foundation, which would allow us to apply for grants, and if anybody made donations, it could be tax deductible as a charity. And we have received the approval from the Internal Revenue Service, so we're really fortunate to do that. And this will allow us to apply for grants, which will, when the money comes in, we can make sure that the Bridging Heaven Earth is on more cities, although it's on 30 cities now, to try to get on every big city we can. And also to make sure all shows, this is the 96th show, are on the internet available, so when the bandwidth increases, everybody will be able to watch the shows all the time. Any show they want, anytime, if they have an internet connection. And then we're talking about setting up a retreat center and a center for the New Age publications, New Age television stations, audio recording sessions, where we can be a central location where everybody in the New Age who needs that information can come and seek us out, and we'd be happy in love and in collaboration to share with them all the gifts that we've been given. So if anybody in the audience feels that they'd like to participate with us and collaborate with us in that way, we're now a 501c3 nonprofit corporation, the Bridging Heaven and Earth Foundation, and we'd be honored to work with anybody like that. So as we normally do at this time, let me lead you in a short meditation, and then Stephen will be on, and we'll have some Omashar videos, and it'll just be a really beautiful, exciting, thought-provoking and love-inspiring evening. So please join me in a short meditation. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So we're going to start with Omashar's first video, Trust to Love. Be open to the love, be open to the connection between us all. You know what this show is about, dedicated to the oneness, and again, that's what this show is about. So whenever we're ready, Omashar, Trust to Love.
dust that gave it birth. Empty feelings find me deep in contemplation, waiting for the rise of Mother Earth. And we all know what we've come here for, and we all feel that our hearts are true, and together we will make it home, and we'll trust to love once more. Walking through these fields of fear that bid for my attention, I don't live here anymore. I surrender to the flow that gives me new direction. All that's left to do is trust and fly. And we all know what we've come here for, and we all feel that our hearts are true, and together we will make it home, and we'll trust to love once more. We've come here for, and we all feel that our hearts are true, and together we will make it home, and we'll trust to love once more.
Hi, welcome. Yeah, we're on the set with Stephen. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so how did you come to write this book? I know you've had a history of combining, I would say, American medicine with Oriental traditions. How did you come to decide to write a book, 8 Steps to Love?
Well, I was in practice for some 20 years in clinical practice as a child psychologist and as a traditional psychologist, seeing people from ages of 4 to in their 70s. And I saw the same kind of conflicts again and again, whether it was with parents and their children, or marital couples, or bosses and employees. And I just thought it was time for somebody to really put something together that people could use, because it was the same kinds of ineffective patterns. However deeply rooted they may have been, they could be addressed in a more educational way, really. So I thought it was time to do something like that people could use for themselves and apply it with some really quick, effective principles.
So yours is really a practical, I mean, I've read parts of the book. I mean, it's really a practical guide to helping people overcome. And interestingly enough, like most people try to avoid stress and conflict, which I guess ultimately is a good idea.
Right.
But you try to use that as a tool to come into a place of harmony in a place.
Exactly.
Why don't you just describe that a little?
You know, one of the things that, interestingly, in the evolution of the book, going from the basic psychology points and so on, was the idea that in the spiritual teachings, a lot of times the ascended masters and so on, Saint Germain was noted to have said that really our bodies become incapacitated because of living according to, not according to the law of love, peace, and harmony, but because of discord in thought and feeling. And so because we're bombarded and we do have discord, what we want to do is take that constricted energy, you know, sadness, anger, depression, fear, all contract us. And so physiologically we want to be able to shift that back. So insofar as if we could be in a place of bliss all the time, as the teachers would suggest as possible, that's good. That's a win.
That is good.
And if we're not,
that would be good.
And if we're not, though,
right.
we can shift to that.
Right.
And that's the idea, to really go back from contracted energy of all the negative emotions into the expansive energy of love. And that means, in a really broad sense, doing what you love in a given situation, focusing on what it is you would want, not what you don't want. And that really makes a whole different mental focus and physical shifting of the energy.
So, I mean, in some ways, it's almost like the glass is half full then half empty. I mean, it's just, is it like just a little switch that changes?
Well,
how would you describe the process as you're going through?
Right. Okay. The context of the process is to really awaken to what we really are within. That we really have a place within us that's a consciousness that is characterized as calm, and also as a caring consciousness, as well as a connecting and a continuous. Now, what those four things are really describe the core self. And so what we're trying to do is access that in the heat of the moment, in the heat of conflict. So you come out of a Deepak Chopra, wonderful presentation, or one of the other spiritual teachers, and you're in traffic in California and road rage hits, right? That's when you want to be able to take and do the steps. And the steps really are geared to access that consciousness of the core self. And so it's not something you create, it's something that you take steps to get out of the way and access that.
So it's almost like peeling an onion. I mean, that you really are the core self, and then all these other things kind of
exactly
come over it, and you can't access the core self. You can't really experience it.
Well, you're taking four roads. The physical road, which is really breathing, stopping, breathing in, I stop and still my mind, breathing out, I stop and still my body, and begin that way. Then you're doing the mental road, which is shifting your focus. So from what the negative emotion is, and one of the steps in the mental shifting is really what I call the shifting energy and focus exercise. Every one of your negative emotions tells you something you don't like. And love as an emotion, as opposed to a metaphysical reality and an ultimate reality, as an experience, is telling us that we love and we value something, that something is important to us. Fear tells us something important is in danger, moves us to run. Anger tells us something important is in danger, moves us to fight. Sadness tells us something that we love has been lost, moves us to tears and acceptance. So we take, in a given situation, say I'm angry. My anger is telling me that I hate it when, as you breathe in and then fill in the blank, you yell at me. And that's because I love it better. It gives me great joy when you talk softly to me. Now, at times in my seminars, I call that the good Italian. Mm-hmm. Because
it comes with pasta.
I hate it when you yell at me, and that's because I love it. It gives me great joy when you talk softly to me. So you make that shift, mm-hmm. and any one of the negative emotions would do that.
Now, does everyone have the same core self, would you say?
Yes. There was a wonderful spiritual teacher, and I don't remember exactly who said this. He said, I am a wave. One day I will become water. That is the first fallacy. Remember the oneness. So in a sense, there was another thing that kind of reminded me of this. One of my teenage patients, when I was in practice, brought in a book on Zen, and it showed a little cartoon of a wave, a little wave comparing itself to a big wave. And so, yeah, everybody is connected, and that's part of the thing about the core self. Once we're in a deeper level of it, we're connecting. And that's one of the ways we know this is through the Reiki healing that I do. One of the symbols we use is one that says the core self, or the God in me acknowledges the God in you, the namaste. But really it's sort of the oneness symbol. So how does somebody lay their hands on a visualization of someone while I'm on the East Coast and they're in Africa, and have something happen instantly? It really attests to that connection, that oneness. Yeah.
And you see that all the time because you do remote healings. That's one of the things that. Why don't you talk about? I know that in 1995 you were going
Right.
along in your like allopathic in a way practice,
Right.
and you had some spiritual background, but not.
Right.
But you had a certain experience that said,
Right.
"This is a new direction," or "This is
Absolutely.
you have to take something else in." Why don't
Right.
you talk about that a little?
I was in Salem, Massachusetts.
The witch trials.
Yeah. And I was at a beautiful little store called Pyramid Books, and a wonderful woman was coming out of the bookstore and had purchased a book on Reiki. And she was dressed in a white dress, a dark skin, jet black hair, and she turned out to be from Guatemala. And so she was teaching a seminar that weekend, and I was accompanied by someone who was already level 1 Reiki and wanted to take the class. Well, I wasn't sure I had any room for it. But that night at about 2 o'clock in the morning, I'm awakened by a purple light that was both kind of internal and external. I could feel it pulsating between my eyes, which I later realized is the third eye, the sixth chakra, and so on. I didn't really know it at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And I would feel this energy shoot into me, and I was a little bit freaked out by it, so I would refuse the permission to stay, and it kept leaving. So the next day, I spoke to the teacher, and she said, "I think you might want to take this class."
Right.
So I did. And then at the end of the day, as I was leaving, it had rained all day. There was intersecting rainbows across the road leading back to the inn where I was staying. That night, at about 2 o'clock in the morning, again, the purple light came. This time I called on my Reiki master guide, and you do a meditation as you're being attuned to Reiki. And you meet your guide, and I had actually met 3 different spiritual teachers, and the first was Christ. So I kind of thought, well, maybe I made this up because of my background growing up as an Episcopalian and whatnot. But as it happened, it was a very emotional experience. So that night, okay, the purple light comes, so I say, I call upon my Reiki master guide, Lord Jesus Christ. If this is good for me, I accept it. If not, I ask you to protect me from it. With that, a slight darkness passed across my eyes, as though you're at the beach and the clouds block the sun for a moment. And a beautiful white light about 15 feet from me in the center of the room looked like a huge butterfly, or like a kind of a ceiling.
Vortex.
Yeah, like a ceiling fan, like the
Right.
white fan coming across, hovered in front of me about a foot away, a very loving consciousness, struck me right in the middle of the forehead, knocked me right out, and I was just radiating with this energy. And the next day I went in to the class, and the teacher called me aside after she did the final initiation, and she said, you were already streaming with the energy. And I said, well, this is what happened. So she said, I finished the attunement, but you already were there. And since that time, there's been one wonderful experience after another with the healings with animals, just heartwarming things. You know, one time I was in Mexico City, coming back from Costa Rica. A dog had a gash in the back of its neck. Everyone was passing the dog going into the church. I did too. I didn't know what else I could do. I came out and I couldn't really position myself to do anything directly hands-on, so I moved over at about 15 feet away. I thought of a story from the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, in which all these people pass by this beggar who they're just find repulsive. And one man stops to help the beggar, and he jumps up and becomes the Lord Maitreya Buddha, this magnificent Buddha.
Right.
And I thought of the same stories there are of Christ, that which you do to the least of my brethren, you do to me. So I start to work on the dog at a distance, and the next thing I know, within a minute, the dog springs up perfectly alive and vital, looked like he was half dead prior to that. And I was so moved almost to tears at that point, and watched him walk off to a shady spot. Now, I don't think the gash was completely healed, but he seemed really energized.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you've seen more and more of these types of things.
Absolutely.
And even at remote.
Remote with animals as well as remote with people. And see, what's interesting from a scientific standpoint, the placebo effect, the expectation of a positive result is oftentimes controlled for, just because people may have given me a kind of a carte blanche to go ahead and send them some energy, because ethically, send it unless they agree to it.
Right.
But some nights I might not have done it, and other nights I have, and then I'll find out, it worked. But with an animal, a guy couldn't make his psychotherapy session one time. He had moved from Hartford to Providence, and he was commuting. He called me, he said, I can't make my session. My dog's tearing my house up. So I've had him in the garage. Now I have him in a cage. He's tears his way out of the cage. I said, what's he doing right now? He said, he's lying down. I said, well, let him lay there for about 10 minutes and then call me back. So I did, and I worked on the dog. And in my mind, you know, I'm doing something almost like a psychologist would do, except with an animal. I'm saying, it's okay, relax. I know it's been hard for you making this transition, da-da-da. Well, bada bing, bada boom, you know. 2 weeks later, he comes back. He tells me the dog's fine. He's, you know,
really?
He said
from that
like 10 minutes,
same night.
Right. Just
so I mean, you had a scientific background, and you're a PhD, right?
Right.
How do you? I mean, this we have a lot of stuff on the show all the time, but how do you try to explain it, or do you not, or does it matter, or how do you approach it?
Well, I go back and forth about that. You know, thinking in terms of the left brain explanations and so on. And every time I think about making an explanation, I find myself really wanting to just go back to the basic thing that William James, as you know, the father of American psychology, he was considered a radical empiricist by himself and a pragmatist. So I approach it in that same vein. You know, truth is empirically what you observe, and what works, pragmatism. So I just keep an eye that I'm doing this procedure, visualizing so-and-so who's now, let's say, in this one instance, a person in Budapest, and they've had some back problems and I've been contacted. So I'm visualizing them in a chair, putting my hands on their back, and going through the procedures, visualizing various energy symbols, and then the result occurs. And so to explain it, I think it's really about the power of love as an ultimate reality.
That it's energetic.
Yeah.
And that there's no time and space that it...
Exactly. And that's, and in fact, I didn't mention it exactly when I said the oneness symbol. Really, the Han Shaza Shonen, which is one of the names of the symbols in Reiki for the distant symbol, is really also no time. It's like acknowledging no time, no space, all connected instantly. And intercessory prayer is another phenomenon I've looked at and studied.
Say that word, the first word?
Intercessory, where you're interceding on behalf of someone else. And Larry Dossey did some research and brought some studies up that Randolph Bird did in San Francisco back in '88. And there's been a recent one done just this past year, and it's been duplicated. So that half the group is prayed for, half the group of patients isn't, and the group prayed for really gets results, just statistically significant. So when you do get into the explanations, you really have to use metaphors, like we're all part of the same ocean of energy, you know, everything looks separate, but it's really not, and that there's no ultimate separation.
But in terms of science, I mean, science would have trouble finding it to be accurate in the scientific methodology, right? Because, but I mean...
Well, you can't do scientific methodology. There have been distant healing studies, and I've been proposing one with the wellness community in Delaware, and I talked to some people at Sloan Kettering in their research department as well to put something together where you have a double-blind study, and you can then, whatever hocus pocus it looks like the remote healing is, well, what's the results? And so, you know, they can be verifiable, and you have like a pre-test,
why do you
post-test.
think there haven't been more studies or more? I mean, you know, one of the problems is there's no pharmaceuticals attached to it, and there's no money and things like that.
Well, you know, this gets to my book in a sense that the dragon of dependency is really the belief that we are dependent on something external to ourselves for our peace of mind and well-being. And in a sense, when Larry Dossey talked about why the prayer study didn't just shoot across the headlines all through the country, was because there wasn't any pill or something that people could take, and something external.
And somebody else could make.
Yeah, plus there's also profit.
Money and
exactly.
Stuff like that.
There's that too.
Yeah.
And so this awakening that we are not really dependent on something external for our peace of mind and well-being. And I found that two experiences over the years that I've been mesmerized by were the prisoner of war experiences, where how do you survive, you know, in this, either this herd of other people where you're really alone in a herd of people in Nazi Germany, or you're in Vietnam in an isolated cell. What do you do? Well, those people, Viktor Frankl and others, discussed that they focused on what they loved. One fellow focused on playing golf that he loved. And that shift, in that moment that you're focusing on that, your immune system, everything's kicking in. So you're flowing. So this energy of love that can flow, you know, in a transcend space and time. And that wonderful movie, I dedicated the book to Roberto Benigni for his wonderful message that life is beautiful no matter what. And there's a wonderful scene in that movie attesting to this, kind of illustrating it, where he had fallen in love with his wife in the movie at a beautiful opera where O Starry Night is playing. Well, in this scene, he's working in the Nazi dining hall, and he's been commissioned to be there. He turns the gramophone around, puts this O Starry Night on, and sends the music out across the foggy night, across the barren soil, across the barbed wire, and then all the way into the window where his wife is. And she comes, her face framed in the window, and a tear comes down as she hears this. But this music transcends all that horror. And, you know, and I think in the distant healing and all, that's really what's happening.
So, you know, we talk a lot about, you know, people try to reason, but basically we're hurtling through space on a ball. I mean, what's reasonable from the get-go? So you try to, you know, cut out a piece of infinity and make it reasonable. And it's only our need to not live in the moment, in a sense, to have all these dependencies, or I don't know if we need to, or just the way this particular experiment has come down, but it's just interesting that we need to reason everything when it's right there. I mean, it works, it's happening, you know.
Exactly. Yeah. You know, one of the things that I mentioned in the book is that we come into this world in these tiny bodies, totally dependent on our mothers for survival. And thus begins our love affair and dependency on the concrete material reality. And it's interesting to me that in Latin, mother, mater, and matter and materiality all kind of seem the same. So in that very beginning moment, we look outside ourselves for relief from stress, from our anxiety, from our negative emotions. And people stay stuck there. Carl Jung, after he broke away from Freud, said beautifully, the mass of mankind live out its lifespan within the confines of the nursery, never daring to go the hero's way, the way of the individuation. And that's so true. I mean, there's
well, the interesting path is that you go from the child to the individualization in a way, and then back to the oneness. I mean, that's like the cycle. You know, and it seems throughout history that this experiment has not been that easy for people to make that full cycle. You know, I think it's getting easier now, but I mean, if you look throughout history, or even in our own lives, I mean, you know, you and I were talking last night, I mean, we've been so gifted in our lives, and still sometimes it's hard to get out of your own way.
Absolutely.
You know, I mean, you teach it, and then in your own life.
You have to, you definitely apply it. I mean, I was, you know, finding that there's times where I, you know, definitely will use the techniques myself. A good example of how the childhood material will affect us again and again. You know, even though we're these incredible spiritual beings, we come down these little bodies, and then we have to move through and then reclaim our power along the way, as the shamans teach us. But initially, I'd gone back to Delaware after I wrote the book in Beverly Hills, and I came back to Delaware, thought I would launch everything there. And here I'm in my hometown, right? Well, they say the prophet doesn't, you know, get honored in his own land, right? Well, what's interesting, I was feeling a little angry at one point about that, and then I felt a little sad at one point. So I took the sadness and I went like this, breathing in, my feeling sad is telling me, I hated that, I'm not getting, you're not, and I just, you do directly, you don't try to talk about it. Visualize, like, let's say the media in that place, that you are not paying attention to what I have to say, you're not hearing me, and I've got all this valuable information, and that's because, and that's a very important sentence, and that's because I love it if you saw what I had to offer and can help me get it out there. Now, step two, you look through and see who you could say that to in your family growing up, and how old are you, and trust what comes. Well, just hear those sentences. You're not paying attention to me, I'd like you to hear what I have to say, I have something worthwhile, it's mom and dad. And once that's identified and released, you suddenly feel your power. You're not calling up worrying about getting rejected by parents in some subconscious way, and you can just call them and say, hey, what's happening here?
Right. All right, I think maybe what we'll do is have the second Omashar video. This is really for all the people who have been calling in and, you know, asking where's Omashar. Really, we're trying to get him, and he's tough to pin down. I don't even think he has a regular phone anymore. We used to have like some 500 number, 800 number, but now he's hard to reach. But this is another piece that Omashar did on one of our shows, We Feel Love, and then we'll be back and talk to Stephen about, maybe we'll go through some of the 8 steps to love. So, Omashar.
in a sea of illusion, feeling so alone, lost on a wave of confusion. Where do you turn? Flow with the tide of completion. Know the reason why. Drink in the waters of healing and be healed. We're coming home to the part of us that's waking up, and we know deep inside of us we've got a friend. We remember the design of our lives. We remember the desire in our hearts, and we feel love, and we feel dive into the depths of your being. Know that all is well. And dive into the deepest ocean and see the truth. Cast off the cover of darkness free yourself from fear. Show that you're ready and willing to make the change. We're coming home to the part of us that's waking up, and we know deep inside of us we've got a friend. We remember the design of our lives. We remember the desire in our hearts, and we feel love, and we feel love.
Hi, welcome. We're back on the set with Stephen. So, when you wrote this book, 8 Steps to Love, I mean, you have certain like tools or techniques, and is that like stop love? I mean, in that stop and love.
Yeah, the acronyms STOP
right,
for stress and LOVE for the conflict piece.
Okay, so why don't you like walk us through that a little bit?
Let me just give you a little context of it so we can see. Basically, most conflicts are coming because people are trying to control the other person. They're acting as if their very life depends on the other person agreeing with them and doing what they need them to do. And that's with parents and children, that's with marital couples, it's with bosses and so on. And so what I wanted to build in was just a way that people could stop and take, under the STOP, it really breaks down into the four roads to the freedom and peaceful power of love within the core self. And S is really where you're doing the physical road, where you're doing stopping. You're stopping, you're doing some breathing, you're doing some statements.
To slow the momentum down of the anger of the...
Well, to interrupt the physiological part of it right away.
Right, okay.
Right away, you're in fight or flight. And right away, you want to then break that down with the breathing. And one of them, there's a number of different things that people can select. But for example, stop, breathing in, I stop and still my mind. And as I exhale, breathing out, I stop and still my body. Breathing in, I can keep my mind cool, and breathing out, my body calm no matter what. Now, one of the things that people can learn is if they'll notice when you breathe in, the air is a little cooler than your body temperature, so that you get that sense of cool and calm. You get a physical anchor right away, a trigger. So breathing in, cool, breathing out, calm. And you can make the calm like a mantra. So when you're doing, like there's a CD that there's a companion to the book, or if you do the exercise in the book and put them on tape, you then, when you're in the heat of the moment, you're conditioned. You've already built it in, so cool and calm could work just like that, like advertising does, pairing it just like that. So then the mental road that you're taking under T, you're continuing, you're doing that, as I mentioned earlier, telling yourself cool and calm, but also what is my anger, fear, sadness, depression telling me? Well, you don't ask it. That's a head trip. It goes into intellectualizing. So breathing in, my anger, fear, sadness, depression is telling me that. I hate it when, because you know it's a judgment of something you don't like. So juice it up with hate it, and that's because I'd love it better if. So that's a mental shift. Then under O, the emotional road. The emotional road, this is where you get at the core of just about all psychotherapy. And this is what you can do for yourself. And that's when you're doing that shifting energy and focus, only this time you do the look-through exercise and see who in your family growing up you could say the same thing to and trust what comes. And a quick example was a woman in Minnesota. I was in Palenque, Mexico. She had a headache, and she wanted me to do some Reiki, so I helped her with a headache. Took a few minutes. She said, I still have tension in my upper right shoulder. And I said, you know, they often say psychosomatically that's a chronic conflict with your mother. If it's chronic, it's not just a one-time thing. I mean, your father. And your left side's with your mother. I'd had both in my practice. She said, the shaman said the same thing to me. I said, well, but she didn't believe it. She said, no, my father and I are fine. I'm thinking, well, fine now, but there's probably some other time. But instead of that, I said, okay, who in your life could, is there a man that you have that problem with? Yeah, my boss. You know, so what would you say to him if you didn't have to worry? She says, you don't see my gifts. You don't see what I have to offer. Okay, you feeling that? Feeling that? Now look through and see. You could say it in your family growing up. Sees her father, goes through that process. Daddy, you don't see what I have to offer, and so on. Compares and contrasts and feels her power now in the situation. She's not a child in fight or flight. You know, she can feel, I don't think you appreciate me, and I'd like you to see what I have to offer. Now, under P is the spiritual road. In the spiritual road, that's when if you still have something left over and you can't move to P, the peaceful power of love, and then proceed, again, another representation of the letter P, you pray. And the prayer would be something like breathing in, please help me see this situation in a new light so I can, and then as you exhale, let go of my pain, find peace and resolution, whether the pain is fear, anger, sadness, depression. And then look for the synchronicity. And this is sort of the fun part for me in the book, that you want to see what your signs are. And a patient of mine one day tells me, he says there's this joke about a minister who's talking about how God provides. Meantime, the church starts to flood. And a boat comes in, it takes away some of the people, and he keeps crying out, God's going to provide, just wait. Well, another boat comes in, takes away the rest of the people, the church floods, it gets he goes out into the steeple, he's hanging there, a helicopter comes by, and he keeps saying, no, God will provide, we drowns. goes and he faces God, and he said, you were supposed to provide.
Yeah, provided with a helicopter.
2 boats and a helicopter.
Right.
Right.
What else did you do?
Yeah. So that's the thing. You have to pay attention and see. Now, okay, so at this point, you're now feeling the peaceful power of love moving within, through, and around your body. Now you proceed to L, and that's listen. We're assuming there's a conflict here, so that's the L step. Listen and get leverage, because you're going to ask them to do what you do for them. You're going to do it for them first. As Stephen Covey often said in his work, seek first to understand, then seek to be understood. Okay, then O, open your mind, be objective, open your heart if you can, and then V, verbalize it back. So an example would be, so you think I'm a complete jerk, is that what you're saying? No, not a complete, you're just a partial jerk. Okay, partial jerk, we reach agreement. Now, E, now you would express what maybe upset you in the situation, going from the, it upset me when, and that's because I would have loved it better if, and you do, again, shifting to that positive, what you would have loved, focus in the interaction. And that, using that as a springboard. You then are effectively using stress, and that's why I call it a stress of effectiveness training in a way, to make that shift and get that energy. It doesn't change the situation. You're in traffic, you want to get home. I hate it, I'm in traffic, I'd like to get home. I'd love it being there, and you visualize what you love, just like the prisoner of war. And even recalling they were in that kind of inspiration, you can make that internal shift.
And you find, because, I mean, do you still have a private practice, or you're kind of
I pretty much,
out of it
Yeah,
now?
no, I gave up in '97, went to L.A. and Beverly Hills, wrote the book there, and then came back to Delaware to launch it. So my practice is really, I'm doing some healing on the side as I'm basically teaching seminars and trying to give people the tools as more of a teaching model now than trying to do the one-on-one, and training other people like professionals who are doing private practices to be able to do this.
So you hold workshops and seminars where people come for a weekend. Do you hold a week-long seminar?
So far it's just been more like weekends, day-long, and weekends, or even a few hours.
And so you'll go through all the tools of the book and have exercises and back and forth and pair up with...
Exactly. Right, so people can learn the 8 Steps to Love is one of the seminars. The other is how to heal through recollection and release. How to do, where you do the look-through exercise. And given the nature of the show, I would mention one person I worked with, actually, I had them go through the steps, and they looked through, saw their parents, and said the same thing they would have said to the boss, that they couldn't, the job they couldn't leave. They were able to say, what had held them with their parents and emotionally hadn't been able to break away. Came forward on that, and also had them to look into the eyes of the boss and then let that take them back to another time, another place. And sometimes people will come up with a past life experience, whatever that may be, a symbolic rendering of the conflict. It's very powerful. And so in that instance, she saw the boss as someone who was a parent in another lifetime who had died in a fire, and she felt guilty about that, had her process. The same steps, though, apply, whether it's, presumably another lifetime or now. So she shifted back to the love and forgiving herself, and then was able to release some of the guilt about needing to stay at the job. So whatever works, it's pragmatism and empiricism.
Right, whatever works to bring you into that feeling of love or harmony or empowerment.
That's really where the power comes back. And that when you're focusing on what you love, you can then move toward that.
So, in other words, when you set these techniques down, I mean, like the end result of some of these exercises will be, well, what do you love? And how do you love to be treated? And how would you feel best treating someone else? Is that...
Well, and you see, one of the things that happens, the concept of codependency is very prevalent. And
why don't you define that?
Yeah. It's generally, there's different definitions, but what I talk about in the book in this regard is codependency really is like a variation of the dragon of dependency, this voracious, they use the imagery of the dragon in Western civilization, not the Chinese dragon like is on the book, but that's where the core self that's liberated, the chi, the energy. But the Western dragon, as Joseph Campbell talks about as a scholar of comparative religions, hoards virgins and treasure, both of which it can't use. It represents that frantically grasping for things in the world, for security and so on. Well, codependency, in a sense, is needing to control others so you feel good. I'll feel good as long as you're okay. A friend of mine in New York used to call it the Vidal-Sassoon complex. I look good if you look good. So
You look mad.
yeah, exactly.
Fernando Lamas looks mad.
Better to look good than to feel good. You know what I mean?
Much better.
Yes, yes. So in this regard, it's very ironic that the ultimate maturity is really where you learn to love freely without clinging and enjoy it like, as Christ said, becoming like a child to enter the kingdom of heaven. So in a sense, here we are postponing gratification to become mature adults and so on, and yet the ultimate thing is the codependent is giving in order to get something external, whereas loving freely is just enjoying it in the moment and you let it go. You're not storing up stamps for later or anything else. And so in that regard, so often people then are repeating patterns of trying to save their parents again and again through current relationships. They don't even know they're doing it. So they're marrying one alcoholic after another or one abusive partner after another. And out of that, there needs to be a declaration of emotional independence, is which one of the steps I'm talking about in the book, under the emotional road, where you then, I deserve to be loved. I deserve that. All the psychopathology I ever saw in my life was all traced to the wounds of love. And that
The wounds?
the wounds of
being
love.
hurt.
Exactly.
Being hurt by love.
Parental love is the milk that builds the bones of self-esteem. And
But if you
without
talk
that,
about past lives, I mean, when does this whole process start? I mean, could it have started 10 years ago, 25 years ago,
Well,
50,000 years ago? I mean,
you start with a symptom and you let that anxiety go
just
back.
keep,
And
and
it-
you can keep feeding it back. I mean, part of the technique, so it can go back 50,000 years.
It can go back as far as necessary, but you may find a lot of it's relieved with just a childhood situation.
This particular physical
Well,
childhood.
I had a triathlete that was seeing me, a woman in her 30s, and she had an anxiety over that would drive her to eat sugar, and she wanted to get rid of her sugar addiction. So we started off. I said, okay, let that anxiety take you back another time, another
'Cause
place.
she had a body fat of like 0.6,
She was-
and she was too. It was too.
She was,
sugar.
yeah, she was in good shape. But she
Oh,
goes
okay.
back. She goes back to about 7, and she sees herself in a scene with her mother, and I get her then. The key is to express, not repress or aggress your stress. Mommy, you're not paying attention to me, so I get her to say it directly, feel it, and reclaim her power as a 7-year-old. Then it's 4. Then there's something in the womb where or prior to the womb, she's in the crib. She turns to apple juice, sugar, again to deal with feeling, she's crying, feeling abandoned. Then I say, subconscious mind, is there any other time or any other experiences that would help with the healing? Then reveal that. Next thing I know, she says, "Oh my God, I'm a man. I'm on a ship. It's British, and I'm going to be drowning." And I've been.
And there's no hypnosis involved
Well,
in the
it's
traditional sense.
it is in an affect bridge, in a linguistic bridge, and in the sense that you're shifting back to a slight altered state of consciousness without doing a traditional kind of deeper and deeper thing. Just by that focus on the anxiety. And a somatic bridge. They're the 3. Focus on those sensations, the somatic. Focus on those words. I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Let that take you back. Or the anxiety again. Focus on the anxiety. So in this case, she goes back and she sees herself shoveling in handfuls of sugar in a British ship where there's tea and sugar in the hold, and she's trapped down there before she dies. So this, again, sugar's connected. Well, the upshot of it was I had her look at that experience, comes through that, and she then looks back over her life, and she is able to let go of the sugar addiction. But it had to do with things in her childhood as well as this other experience that really, and 18 months later when she contacted me, she had moved to Europe, she was doing fine still. So that was a release.
So the results, I mean, from the seminars and the workshops are in a way unbelievable. I mean, except what's believable, what's reasonable. But
Right.
you've been seeing some extraordinary things happen
Yeah.
as people go through the process.
Right. It's been really rewarding. And I love to see it. In a way, I mean, you do what you do and you do the best you can do as you go along. I almost feel like apologizing to all the people that saw me traditionally when I see now how much faster it could be for them and they could be empowered. And I see that as more, with my last name Jackson, kind of like the heritage of Andrew.
Or Action.
Well, yeah, Action Jackson.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I said, oh, Christ, you got Action Jackson on this show. This is great.
This is but to democratize the whole process, you know, put it out there so more and more people can do it and not be the one. Even in the healing, I do some healings, and they're really very rewarding. But I like to be able to attune more and more people to Reiki and to the transformative healing process and train people so that more and more people could do it for their loved ones as well as for their practices. So it's been a real mission. It's a full-time job at this point to get that all going.
Do you see, I mean, as far as you know now, is all the information that needs to come through you in the 8 steps to love? Or do you see, you know, like 8 steps plus 1, or, you know?
I think, no. I'm glad you asked that, because basically the guts of it, I call it Set for Life seminars, and SET stands for Stress Effectiveness Training, which in essence is self-expression training, how to access and express the core self. And thirdly, what's the ultimate outcome? Spiritual energy transformation. We hear about spiritual healing, we hear about energy healing. Well, as we choose to go from hate or anger, frustration, whatever, back to love, that's a spiritual energy transformation in every situation we do that in. Ultimately, we leave a kind of a life like a caterpillar and become a butterfly where we can transcend better, like the golden dragon. We stop being the earthbound dragon given to fight or flight. We become the golden light dragon.
We rise above the maze.
Exactly. And so in that regard, a lot of the techniques then for future work will be involving China Sang, ancient techniques, mudras, hand positions, meditations, all the ancient material that can help refine and take you further. But the guts of the work is how to transform from hate to love in the course of everyday life. And then you build on that with all these refining techniques, you know, deeper meditations. Qigong, I'm doing that myself lately as well as Reiki and so on.
Yeah, actually, there was one time that I think Buddha said, you know, somebody came to Buddha and said, you know, I want to reach enlightenment. He said, you got to get to even first, you know.
Exactly.
I mean, you know, we got to get to the point where we're not suffering before you can know what bliss is.
Well, you know, one of the things that I say too, I had my mystical experience, but and they're great, these visions and so on I've had in recent years. But the thing is, it's to be like Moses. You come down off the mountain and apply it to everyday life.
Yeah, you live in this life and you bridge heaven and earth. I mean,
exactly. You know, one of the things, as the new year was coming in, the last song that was played by the piano player happens to be the last song I mentioned in the book. And I mentioned songs, I mentioned movies. The book's got popular culture references because it's in the atmosphere. It's all around us, and
it affects us.
And it really is. You know, it's like speaking through a lot of these movies and so on. So what happened was, there's a concept in the book about how to love freely, and one of the ways that we do this is an old gravestone said these words, and I saw them in my senior year in college. All that's bright must fade. All that's fair decay. All we loved was made to bloom and pass away. And yet, after all the 8 steps are gone over in the book and so on, at the end, I say, and yet we can add the timeless tunes of George Gershwin to this.
Right.
And yet our love is here to stay.
Exactly.
So here it is, Alan. It's the you know, the piano player says, this is the last song I will sing in this century.
Right.
And that's it.
Yeah, I think this is the last sentence you're going to say on this show, too. So we're reaching the end of the rope. So let me just say, if anybody wants to know what Stephen's workshops are, call me, Alan, 805-687-2053. We love you. Thanks for all your help. 805-687-2053. Good night. God bless you.